So for example, at the beginning, God makes, here's how the beginning goes. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Okay, so we got to look at the first few lines here. So this is God justifying himself to Job. He says, "Can you pull in Leviathan with a fishhook, or tie down its tongue with a rope? Can you put a cord through its nose, or pierce its jaw with a hook? Will it keep you begging for mercy? Will it speak to you with gentle words? Will it make an agreement with you, for you to take it as your slave for life? Can you make a pet of it like a bird, or put it on a leash for the young women in your house? Will traders barter for it? Will they divide it up among the merchants? Can you fill its hide with harpoons, or its head with fishing spears? If you lay a hand on it, you will remember the struggle and never do it again. Any hope of subduing it is false. The mere sight of it is overpowering. No one is fierce enough to rouse it. Who is then able to stand against me? Who has a claim against me that I must pay? Everything under heaven belongs to me." More computer trouble. Oh, there we go. "I will not fail to speak of Leviathan's limbs, its strength and its graceful form. Who can strip off its outer coat? Who can penetrate its double coat of armor? Who dares open the doors of its mouth, ringed about with fearsome teeth? Its back has rows of shields tightly sealed together. Each is so close to the next that no air can pass between. They are joined fast to one another. They cling together and cannot be parted. Its snorting throws out flashes of light. Its eyes are like the rays of dawn. Flames stream from its mouth. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke pours from its nostrils as from a boiling pot over burning reeds. Its breath sets coals ablaze, and flames dart from its mouth. Strength resides in its neck. Dismay goes before it. The folds of its flesh are tightly joined. They are firm and immovable. Its chest is as hard as rock, hard as a lower millstone. When it rises up, the mighty are terrified. They retreat before its thrashing. The sword that reaches it has no effect, nor does the spear or the dart or the javelin. Iron it treats like straw, and bronze like a rotten wood. Arrows do not make it flee. Sling stones are like chaff to it. A club seems to it but a piece of straw. It laughs at the rattling of the lance. Its undersides are jagged potsherds, leaving a trail in the mud like a threshing sledge. It makes the depths churn like a boiling cauldron, and stees up the sea like a pot of ointment. It leaves a glistening wake behind it. One would think the deep had white hair. Nothing on earth is its equal, a creature without fear. It looks down on all that are haughty, and is king over all that are proud." Well, so what's God doing? He's describing what he defeated in order to create the world. That's Marduk and Tiamat. Okay, so that's one reference like that. All right, so now another reference like that. This is from Psalms 74. "Yet God is my king of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. Thou didst break the sea in pieces by thy strength. Thou didst shatter the heads of the sea monsters in the waters. Thou did crush the heads of Leviathan." Right? That's the creature that we just heard described. "Thou gavest him to be food to the folk inhabiting the wilderness." Now you remember, so when Marduk defeats Tiamat, he cuts her into pieces and makes the world out of her pieces. And here what's happening is that the force that encounters the Leviathan is able to break it into pieces and feed everyone with it. Now, the reason I'm telling you that in relationship to this is because, "And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep." Let me tell you a little bit about that, those lines. Before God begins to create, the world is tohu wabohu. That's from the Hebrew. The word tohu by itself means emptiness or futility. So there's a psychological element to that, eh? And that emptiness or futility in some sense is what you confront when you're trying to extract your life from the world. It is used to describe the desert wilderness as well. Tohu wabohu, chaos, is the condition that bara, ordering, remedies. Okay, so there's the idea in the first verses that this initial chaos is being ordered, and the order is what makes the world. So it's standard cosmology. Order emerges out of chaos, and the thing that makes it emerge is the Word of God. Now, darkness and deep, which is tehom in Hebrew, are two of the three elements of the chaos represented in tohu wabohu. The third is the formless earth. In the Enuma Elish, the deep is personified as the goddess Tiamat, the enemy of Marduk. Here it is the formless body of primeval water surrounding the habitable world. Okay, so but we know Tehom and Tiamat are the same word, or at least Tehom was derived from Tiamat. So the idea that's presented at the beginning of Genesis is the same. It's an abstracted and psychologized representation of the story that the Mesopotamians put forward. So Yahweh is Marduk, roughly speaking, going out and conquering the dragon of chaos and making order out of it. And then there are these allusions later, say in Job and in the Psalms, of him doing exactly that, conquering a primordial monster and making the world out of its pieces. Well, so what does that mean exactly? Well, it means that the highest ordering principle is the spirit that goes out into the darkness or the deep, that encounters the dragon of chaos, because obviously Leviathan is a dragon, and defeats it and feeds the people as a consequence. Well, we are hunting creatures after all, and in order to establish our place in the world, we had to go out there and conquer the dragons of the wilderness. You might wonder, why does a dragon breathe fire? Well, there's a bunch of reasons as far as I can tell. Fire is awe-inspiring. So fire and a terrible predator are the same thing because they both inspire awe. Fire is transforming. But what's a good metaphor for being bitten by a poisonous snake? Well, have you ever seen the wounds that a poisonous snake produces if you're bitten by them? It's like someone took your arm and incinerated it. And so the idea that a snake has fiery breath is, well, let's call it close enough from a metaphorical perspective, right? Now, God is claiming to Job that he's the spirit that clears the wilderness and then builds order out of chaos. And because he's the embodiment of that spirit, in some sense, Job has no reason to ever question his moral decisions. It's something like that in the story of Job. But the point, that point we'll leave aside because it's a more complicated issue. The point is that the writers of the Bible are trying to dream up a representation of the spirit of civilization. That's the right way to think about it. You can think of Yahweh as the spirit of civilization. And what is that? Well, it's the thing that encounters the wilderness and makes habitable order, but then it's also the spirit of the order itself. And that's, I think, why in Christianity there's a representation of God the Father, because he's a representation of the culture that's generated after the chaos is ordered, right? You have the spirit that goes out into chaos and orders, and then you have the spirit of the order, and then the spirit of the order and the spirit of the ordering principle have to figure out how to coexist. That's partly what the Egyptians were trying to figure out, right? There's a dynamic relationship between the culture and the spirit that generates the culture. And then you might also ask, should the culture be superordinate, or should the spirit that generates the culture be superordinate? And the answer seems to be, the emergent answer seems to be that the spirit that generates the culture should be superordinate to the spirit of the culture. It's something like that. And that's also why I think that one of the brilliant discoveries, let's say, of Western individualistic civilization is that the group is there to serve the individual, because the individual is the thing that revivifies the group. So each depend on the other integrally. But if you subordinate the individual to the group, then the group stagnates and dies. And so that's a very bad long-term strategy, even though the group and belonging to the group is clearly necessary. You need to uphold the values of the group, but the values of the group should be subordinated to producing the individual who gives the group vision. And the Mesopotamians figured that out. The Egyptians figured that out. We figured it out. We just don't know that we figured it out. And it's not a mere arbitrary supposition. All right. So I should show you, because this is actually interesting, I think, perhaps. Good. I want to show you what the cosmology, what people considered the structure of the initial order, because it's kind of interesting. And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. Well, so what are they thinking about? Well, that's the sort of classical view of the world. It's something like that, is that there's a disk, and that's the disk we inhabit. And there's land, that's the disk, and under the disk there's water, fresh water, and then under that there's the ocean. And then on top of that there's a dome, and that's the sky, that's the firmament, that's heaven. And there's water above that, well, obviously, because it rains, so there has to be water up there. So that's the way the cosmos was conceptualized, just so you know. Now, it's a phenomenological conceptualization because that's what it looks like, right? And you might say, well, that's wrong. It's like, well, yes, it's wrong in a functional sort of way. It's right from a phenomenological perspective, but it's wrong from a scientific perspective. It was never designed to be a scientific perspective. So, all right, so we won't bother with this part. We'll start here. So God makes animals and plants and all of that, and then at the end of it, this is on the, which day? Sixth day. God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and the fowl of the air, and over the cattle and all of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. Okay, well, there's two relevant issues there. One is, let us make man in our image after our likeness. Well, what exactly does that mean? Well, we've already encountered that to some degree. We've already encountered what the nature of the Spirit of God is in this story. The nature of the Spirit of God that creates order out of chaos is the thing that creates order out of chaos. And so the statement here is that there's something about human beings that partakes in that. Now, when I started unpacking this, I thought, okay, look, there's an idea that's at the root of our legal system. And so our legal system is the articulation of the patterns by which we live. And to a fair degree, it's an evolved system. It's a culturally constructed system, but it's an evolved system as well. And it's predicated on the idea that there's something about the individual that the law has to respect. Well, so the question is, well, is that just an arbitrary supposition? Because that's really the question. It's the same question as, is Western civilization founded on something that's a rock, or is it just founded on something that's an opinion? Well, it's the same question with regards to the law. The law assumes that there's something about you that's sovereign. Even if you're a murderer, you have inalienable rights. Now, you think that is a bloody weird thing for any sort of system to have come up with, because the idea that if you're the ultimate in malevolent transgressors, that you still have some sort of sovereign value, it's like that is such an unlikely thing for people to think up that you really have to think a long time about how that might have come to be. Well, there's an idea here. That's the idea, is that there's something about human beings, men and women, you know, because people often complain about the patriarchal structure of the Bible. It's based on a misapprehension of anthropology that was popularized by someone named Gimbutas at UCLA. For her perspective, there's not a shred of historical evidence, although there's some psychological truth in it. In Genesis, both men and women are created in the image of God. And that's quite a remarkable thing, I think. It's a remarkable part of the document, because it's not what you'd expect from a patriarchal, you know, from a document that was designed to do nothing but extend the dominion of the patriarch. It's like you would have left women with the damn cattle. That would have made things a lot easier. And that isn't what happened. So both men and women have this image. And what's the image? Well, that's the image of the thing that can order chaos. And so it's necessary to treat you as if you have intrinsic value, because the fact that you can partake in the process of mediating between order and chaos means that you're basically the salvation of society. That's what it means. And so society can't impose on you to too great a degree, because you are too valuable for even the law to push arbitrarily past a certain point. Now then you have to think. This is where you really have to think about what you believe. Do you believe that or not? Because there's not much difference, really, technically speaking, there's not much difference between that and believing these stories. It depends bloody well what you mean by believe. They're not scientific representations of an evolutionary process.